Hi, Cody here with Mastering Light. In today's video, I want to talk about one of the ways that I like to start a painting, or more importantly, one of the ways I like to develop my ideas for the painting. So I'm going to start out in Photoshop working on a photo that I'm going to use for reference for this alla prima painting today. And you'll see kind of my thought process, the things I like and don't like and want to change to make it a better design. We'll talk about some of the shortcomings of the photo, and then you'll get to see me do my thumbnail sketch based on those thoughts. And then you'll see me block in and begin the painting. And this will be an alla prima painting, meaning it's painted all in one session, start to finish. So let's begin. So here is a reference photo that I took a couple of years ago, and I love the way this deer, this mule deer in this case, this was in Flagstaff, Arizona, and this mule deer passed through while I was plein air painting, and I just grabbed my phone really quick and got this shot. Of course, the deer didn't hold this pose for more than a split second, so I felt lucky to have captured it, although it's really not that great of a photo. It's barely in focus, and the overall composition needs some work, but there are some key elements about it that I like, and so I want to see if I can make a painting of it. Now the first thing, of course, the focal point is, of course, our deer, and the way the light is hitting her back and her ears, especially the side of her face. I'm going to ignore this little red tag in her ear here. We'll just eliminate that. But clearly, she's our focal point. So the first thing I think about is, where do I want to place her within the composition? And, if we think about rule of thirds in a painting, often it's something like this. And so in this frame, she's positioned well. However, I'm going to crop this. So the first thing I want to do is we're going to just crop the image a bit. I think a lot of what's going on the left side is sort of unnecessary. I also want to zoom in a little bit on our focal point, our lady of the hour. And however, normally I would just crop in like this, but I want to keep this tree over here on the right. I think it provides a nice contrast. So since I want to do a vertical painting, I'm going to bring it in more like this. Now if we crop that, now what we have is, I'm liking the trees better in the general composition, although this tree over here needs a bit of help. However, our deer needs to be moved over, maybe, somewhere in this area. And this tree here is just kind of loose. There's a lot of space between the branches. It's kind of evenly spaced, and I don't really love that either. So we'll change that tree. I'm going to make it a little smaller and much more solid. It'll probably, in fact, I'll probably make two trees. I'll make one, maybe a smaller one, and then maybe a taller one here, and they'll be, a lot more solid. Maybe something along these lines here. And then also I want to kind of redesign our foreground brush. I like this red brush in the foreground here, but it's just kind of, that whole mass, I think we can redesign that a little bit. I do like the this hillside back here. That's a nice, you know, diagonal shadow coming across. However, it cuts right through the center of our canvas. It's about halfway from the top or the bottom, and I want to change that. I'm going to bring that down a little further. I'll probably make it, instead of a 50-50 split, I'll make it more of a 60-40. Maybe I'll bring that down here, and I might even push everything down a little more, maybe more like here. So these are some of the thoughts I'm having about this. I definitely want to kind of redesign the foreground a little bit. I definitely want to move Our Lady over to the right, change the trees over here, and redesign. You know, we've got this great big clump, and then it's smaller. And so I want to even that out. Maybe I'll make another bigger thing here, make it more step. Maybe we'll create an opening. I don't know. I'll work on that in my drawing. The other thing is, by moving this hillside lower, instead of having it be here, maybe I'll bring it down like this, and that will allow me to pull these trees down further, and I think that is also going to be more interesting. And then I can also bring all of this color, I can bring that a bit lower, and again, I think that's going to make a nice contrast with the rest of the composition, contrast with against the shadow. In other words, the color against the grayish non-color, right? So even though this mule deer is our focal point, and we're going to move her over, she's a small part of the overall composition. And of course, she's in the light, and anytime you have life and light together, that will be the focal point. However, the secondary focal point is the trees. You know, that's where the color is, right? And then we'll counterbalance that with a bit more color here in the foreground. I definitely want to play off of these reds in the foreground. So there you go. That's the first step that I typically do when I'm working from photo. I look at first, what is my overall idea, the concept for this painting, and what are some of the things about the scene that I find visually exciting. And so in this case, of course, the deer and the colors of the trees and the contrast between light and shadow as well. This is a Rotring Rapid 2.0 mechanical pencil. I like this one. It's all metal. It's got a little bit of weight to it. It feels good in your hand. And it's kind of a fat lead, the 2.0. And I believe it's a 2 or a 3B lead. But as I often do, I'll sketch out a rectangle in the approximate proportions of my canvas. In this case, I'm going to do a 12 by 9 inch canvas. And here I'm going to establish that midway point and make sure that it's not dead center in the canvas. Remember, we're going to lower the shadow line just a bit. So I'll make a couple marks here that represent the halfway point of the canvas, and that just reminds me to keep that line a little bit below that. More of a 60-40 split in our design. And here I am just trying to determine both proportion and placement of the deer. And you'll see in the painting that I stuck pretty close to this. I moved everything up just a little bit to give myself room for the foreground, but it's pretty close to what I designed here. And you'll see in a moment. For the rest of the drawing, I'm going to just speed this up a bit. And again, redesigning that foreground brush. Here's our new trees. And the little light strip, the shadow bank, and then the upper trees. As you can see, it's all just thinking about big shapes and value. So as you can see, I'm going to tape this up on my easel right next to the panel, just to remind me throughout the painting process of what my intention is. Of course, I won't slavishly follow this, but it's a good start. There's my reference photo off to the side, the one we did in Photoshop. And now we are ready to begin. This is a canvas panel, and you can see that I toned it previously. The tone is dry, and I'm sketching on top of this with charcoal. As I like to do quite often, charcoal is a great way to block things in because it's just so easy to make any changes you want. Just take a paper towel, wipe it off, and redraw as many times as needed. So here I'm just thinking about redesigning the foreground brush a little bit, creating a little bit of a lead in. Here's the little cluster of trees, and then that gives me a little bit more proportion to figure out the size and placement of the deer, and just redefining those trees a bit more. Now we're starting the painting. I began by blocking in the hillside, thinking that if I got that value correct, that everything else I could relate back to that value. Sometimes I'll start with the darkest value, like the pine trees in the middle, but sometimes I don't want that. It's often preferable to just start out with one of the medium shadow values. Next, I start with just a slightly darker value for the deeper shadows behind the aspen trees. And again, I'm being careful to keep this not too dark and also not too warm. I want kind of a cooler shadow back there so that when it sits next to my yellows and oranges of the trees, that I don't have to go full cadmium orange to get a feeling of brightness. The contrast between a cooler shadow and a warm bright makes the warm seem brighter without having to use full 100% chroma, like orange or cadmium yellow right out of the tube. We can still maintain a little control and a little restraint. And now a little time lapse of blocking in the trees, the aspens. I started with kind of a greenish mid-tone to make that transition between the cooler background color and the brighter fall leaves on the aspen trees. And I'm keeping most of the chroma in the center area because I want to keep your attention kind of in the center of the canvas. And I'm letting the strokes become larger, looser, and more abstract as I approach the edges of the canvas. So a lot of kind of semi-abstract directional strokes here, really thinking of these trees as a big mass and wanting to keep that a little bit, again, a little abstract. Here's a little better view of it, so you can see the design at this stage, and here's the finished painting looking back at autumn.